So just some background information, we're MedEDU. We're all high schoolers who want to like provide medical career information to other high schoolers. We're using Instagram primarily for our posts,
Mhm.
and we just want to interview you today to like get more information on that. So I'm Yashwan Pancha, I'm ninth grade, and I'm going over high school. And yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm Shivaji. I also go to Noah High School, and I'm a ninth grader. So we would like to like post this video on YouTube, and we're doing this to get like more followers and reach out to more high schoolers interested in medicine. And so we were like planning to ask you about like what you do at your job and like how has COVID impacted you overall. And so Arishi will be asking those questions.
Awesome. Yeah, this is really great, like you guys doing this. I think it's for you guys to start off in high school and be looking at this now, I think that's fantastic to start thinking about it and then try and offer those resources to other kids too. So I'm happy to help.
Yeah, we live in like a really like science STEM-based school, so like lots of kids are interested in medicine, but like I think in my experience it's more like like what we see is like pediatrician, surgeon, like no one thinks out of the box anywhere else. So like that's why I think like I didn't start this, it was with Yashwan and them, but the idea is that there's more careers in medicine other than just like like basic patient doctor kind of relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, have we started recording? Yashwant, Shivaji, someone? Cool. Okay. Before we like start officially, should we call you like what do you want to be called during the interview?
You can just call me Emma. Yeah, I'm technically still getting my PhD, so I'm not yet a doctor, but hopefully soon.
Yes, and then soon later we'll call you Dr. Emma. Okay. So first and foremost, just like a general question, why did you decide to go into a medicine-related career?
Yeah, so back in kind of high school time, I had a friend who actually passed away of cancer. I think so actually when I was a teenager. And I remember seeing her family just kind of like go through that grieving process. And at that point, I was really interested in science. And I thought, well, why don't I go into a science career where I can actually like help people? Because I wanted to help people like her family. And that led to me to take a high school biology class. And I just completely fell in love with biology, specifically genetics and kind of the cell. And at that point, I thought, okay, well, if I want to do science, like what could my career sort of be? And I was thinking of that kind of at your guys' age too. And for me, I decided I didn't want to be like a medical doctor because that took so much time for schooling, and it was also really expensive and kind of cost prohibitive in that way. So I ended up deciding to pursue a degree in genetics at North Carolina State University. And with genetics, I loved the idea of it because you can kind of study someone's DNA and how their body's put together. And in a lot of cases, we can find certain treatments to help people at a specific genetic level. So that really appealed to me when I was looking for a potential career.
Yeah, and also I'm taking biology. I don't think they are, and like we just started like the genetics unit, so I heard you were geneticists. I thought that was cool. So could you summarize your job / like career path in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, definitely. So I got a degree in genetics, and I had some opportunities to do research during college, and I highly recommend that for anyone who's thinking about if they want to become a scientist and do like a research heavy career, is to get in a lab. I was even able to get in a lab in high school, and some places will give you that opportunity. So kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis now is I'm getting a PhD in genetics and molecular biology. So I do a lot of work at just pipetting back and forth into different tubes. We do work with cells as well. So we'll grow cells in a very like clean room environment. So that way we don't contaminate the cells with bacteria. And I specifically work with muscle cells. So we study how muscle cells grow and develop. And we really want to understand how muscle cells grow on a just normal basis. So that way when we look at people with muscular dystrophy, we can understand what's going wrong in their case and look at the genetics of that.
Okay, so for follow-up question for that, you chose a path to study, like do a PhD in genetics, and then within that you focus on like muscle cells. And that itself could be like, within that there's so much to learn and there's so much to pursue just within muscle cells?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm actually in a conference this week and there's a lot of talks about muscle. And I just realized I know so little about muscle, even though I study this. There's so many other aspects to it as well, because I focus more on the genetics, but other people focus on the biophysics. Other people focus on the chemistry and the different like ions that allow myosin and actin to contract your muscles. It's the longer you're in science, the more you realize you don't know.
So like a regular doctor would just generally know more like generally about all the body systems to diagnose someone. How you research with your PhD, you're focused on learning more about specific like nitty-gritty parts of the body.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. So when we, as a research scientist, we will put our results out in these peer-reviewed papers. And a lot of times medical doctors will use those papers to stay up to date on the field and then kind of know if they need to adjust treatments for their patients. But when you're a research scientist, you tend to be like right on the front lines of the new research. And the medical scientist will more take that research and use it for people.
That's really interesting because especially for me, and I think Joshua and Shivaji can relate, like we have not parents, but like uncles and like grandparents who are doctors, and like I don't know any research scientists, which is really crazy to me, and like it's interesting to talk to one. So what does your like day look like? You can talk about what your day looked like before COVID, after COVID, just in general, what does your day look like?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, I was probably in the lab for anywhere between 9 to 10 hours a day.
Wow.
And a lot of what I would do would, like we have some experiments. Most of our experiments, you kind of set them up and then you kind of just wait around. So I'd set up an experiment, maybe run a gel where I look at DNA. And while that gel is running using electricity, I can go and like read different papers or do some data analysis. There would be other days where I'd go and take pictures of my cells with a microscope, and then I'd spend several days analyzing those images. We'd attend seminars, we'd get free food at seminars, which was really nice. But once COVID hit, our university, the one I'm at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill right now for my PhD, and the university shut down from March of last year to June. So we were fully at home at that time. Thankfully, my project, I do some bioinformatics, which is basically just using coding to look at biological systems. And I was able to do quite a lot of that from home. So now I'm back in the lab probably about 75% of the time. So like today I'm working from home and just doing some data analysis. But tomorrow I'll go into lab and start an experiment with my cells. So research science is nice in that you can have some flexibility. Like you don't always have to be in the lab all the time because a lot of things you do can be done just on a computer.
So when you talk about bioinformatics and coding, what do you mean? Like coding is another part of your job?
Yeah, so coding is actually a pretty big part of my job. So for those of you guys who, I don't know how much you've done with DNA and gene expression, but in our body we have DNA, which are the instructions for our cells to tell us what proteins to make. And these proteins are the building blocks of our cells. And we can actually measure the amount of the DNA messages, also known as the RNA messages. We can measure these in the cell in real time. So one thing that we do in the lab is we can do these sequencing experiments called RNA sequencing, and it basically takes a snapshot of the cells and what the RNA messages are. And then we have to go in and bioinformatically, we're basically trying to match up these really tiny DNA pieces, match them up all together so that we can look at the whole genome at once.
Is this called karyotyping?
It's not exactly karyotyping, but it's similar. Karyotyping's more of a bigger snapshot. So I think they do it when you're looking at like, I'm trying to think, like 23andMe will do karyotyping and some other things, but this is looking at a whole genome scale. So if you look at all the DNA in your body. So we can use coding to do that because it's a lot faster than, I don't think you could ever even do it manually.
That's really freaky because we did like karyotyping in class today, so everything is coming full circle. So I think I looked at your blog like on your website, and you had one post that was called like PhD student. Nope, and it's an apprentice in the trench. So I kind of scanned through it, and you talked about your experience between like, are you a student? Is it your job? So can you just like summarize or talk about that post?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, being a PhD student, I do tell people when they're thinking about going into research to be very sure they want to do it because it's it's a difficult career in a sense that for 5 years you're doing research, and when you're in science and doing research, you're researching all the time, because a lot of times you'll do an experiment and it will fail, or you think something is working one way and then you repeat the experiment and your result completely changes, and then you wonder, well, what's happening? Why is the biology changing? So it's one of those things where you have to be very persistent and have perseverance, and kind of you develop a lot of resiliency in grad school because you keep having to pick yourself up after you fall down after doing an experiment. But I think there's a lot of merit in that as well. And that post was kind of talking about just some of that, if you're a student or if you're an employee, because at this point you have a degree, not master's, you have a bachelor's degree from college, and then you're in the process of getting another degree. But a lot of times people still think that, oh, you're just in grad school, and they just think you're taking classes. Or in reality, you're devising your whole research. You are reading papers, you're trying to devise experiments, and you're making a big difference in the field that you're in. So you're an employee and you're doing some great work, but a lot of people don't recognize that unless they're in that same field as you are.
So before I mention this, I'm a freshman, they're all freshmen, and I know things about college, but I don't know a lot. And I was reading this post and you talked about a PhD or employee, and my dad was sitting in the other room and he was in a meeting, and I randomly just yelled to him. I was like, do PhD students get paid? And he's like, yeah, some amount. And I was like, what? Because I had never thought about that. I thought the same thing, you're just a student and you're just taking classes and to have something to put on your resume to apply for other jobs. It's you're continuously you have a research project during your school in your classes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm really glad you brought that up, because a lot of people, and I didn't know this until I was, I think, a senior in college, that you get paid a salary to do your PhD, at least in the States. I don't know if I think most other countries too, because it's one of those fields, if you did a PhD in a humanities field, a lot of people don't get paid there and they have to work alongside that. But when you're doing a PhD in science, you are full-time a scientist. You don't have time to go and do another job. So yeah, you get paid. That was one reason why I chose grad school, a PhD program over an MD program, because you get paid for PhD, whereas you have to pay $200,000 for an MD program.
So your journey through, you have a career in genetics, and you have a bachelor's, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a bachelor's, and then your PhD is going to take, did you say 5 years?
Yes. So it's normally about 5.5 years. So I am almost done with my 4th year right now.
Right. So this journey, I think for doctors, it's 11 to 14 years, which is a really long time. But even this journey is a long, long time. So what advice would you give to high school students who are just unsure about that time commitment to school?
I would say the biggest recommendation is to try and do some research in college. A lot of labs will allow you to volunteer, which I know is not great because a lot of people can't afford to just volunteer their time in a lab. But there are quite a few opportunities for you to apply for funding to be able to work in a lab, and then you would get paid to work in a lab, or some labs even will pay you. And that will give you a glimpse into seeing if you like research and if you'd want to pursue research for 5 years. So I worked in, I think, 3 different labs in college, and I definitely got a lot of experience doing research, but there still was a lot more I learned about research once I got to grad school too. So it's not like you fully know if you want to do research if you try it in college, but you get a good idea.
Are you aware of any opportunities for high school students to get involved in research if they're thinking about pursuing a PhD?
For high school students, it kind of goes on a lab by lab basis. So when I was a senior in high school, I contacted the Department of Genetics that I was planning to go to for college, and I asked them if they had any opportunities for high school students. And they actually were able to connect me with a lab, and I was able to volunteer time in high school and get experience. So some labs will do that, and some labs have that advertised on their websites. I think there are opportunities. I'll have to look and see online, but I think there are some opportunities for high school students to get some sort of science experience, whether it's maybe a day doing experiments. I haven't heard as much where it's a full-time lab position, unless it's, Okay.
I just lost my page. what do you recommend to students applying to college to pursue a career in medicine? What should they do to prepare now? This goes along with our other question, but what should they do to prepare now? What should they plan for the future? Like, just in general.
For college, I think one big thing colleges look for is, like, academics are definitely important, but they also want to see who you are as a person. Like, what do you enjoy doing? They like to see, I know I did a lot of community service in high school, and just that helped me write a better essay to get into college. And they were a lot of college application committee, they want to know who you are and to kind of be impressed by that and that get to know you. I've done several. I have a bachelor's in English as well, so I've done different reviewing of people's essays to get into college and grad school. And that's one of the biggest things I tell people when they write these essays is to show the admissions committee who you are and why you're a cool person and why they would want to have you on campus. And I think a lot of that comes from just having other hobbies besides school, because I know I definitely pushed myself way too much in high school, and I wish I'd kind of enjoyed more of the time doing the things I actually enjoyed doing.
Like, our school district is pretty competitive when it comes to like college apps and everything. So like there's always seminars like every week regarding like how to get into this college, how to register college app, and it's interesting to hear just like simply doing things outside of school other than your academics can be more beneficial for your essays. So
yeah,
good to know.
Well, and that's a lot of pressure to put on you guys as freshmen too, to already be like focusing on that so much.
Yeah. Moving completely away from the school aspect, what do you like most about your career?
I think the funny thing is, after being in grad school for 4 years now, I'm not planning to pursue research as a career after this. So I'm planning to go more into the science communication route. But one thing I've so enjoyed about grad school and science in general is the ability I have to organize and to be creative and to kind of think outside the box. I'm not the best at doing that normally, but being a scientist has really encouraged me to try and get better at those things. I like it when I have a list of things to do and it's really clear what I need to do, but science has encouraged me to try and understand the biology of something and ask these crazy questions and then seek out the answers to those questions and keep persevering in that.
Right. Along with that, you said you have a bachelor's, you have a PhD, and you said you want to go into science communications. So with the education that you have, like, what do you plan to do after? Like, can you go into that?
Yeah, so my plan as of now is once I graduate with my PhD, I'm hoping to pursue work with a medical communications company. So they will do work on behalf of pharmaceutical companies and kind of do a lot of the promotional materials for these pharmaceutical companies, help them devise some of their communication strategies, and on the whole, just kind of act as a front of communication. So one of my favorite things to do is just take these complex science topics from all different kinds of science and then break them down into these manageable and understandable small pieces for people to know.
So is that why you were an English major as well, along with like your PhD, so you can work on like communication and writing out your research?
That's the funny thing, because I added on the English major just for fun because I missed reading and writing papers. But then going to grad school, I realized how helpful it was to have that English degree, because a lot of what we do in science is we have to communicate our science, get people interested in it, and we have to write grant applications to get money for our science. And that all requires a lot of communication skills. And most scientists, we're getting better, but there's a lot of scientists who aren't very good at communicating their science, and that can really affect the ability of their science to be heard.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. Like, for my parents want me to obviously pursue something in science, and that's what I'm interested in as well. But it's always been like, once you get to college, everything has to be focused on one way or another on what you want to do. Mm-hmm. So, but there's so many other skills out there that might not be related to your field, but could help you like your English major. So
yeah, definitely. And I think there is more of a push in colleges now to be what they call interdisciplinary. So to have to be in English and also science or math and history, so that you can kind of bring these fields together and bring a way you think about English to science.
Yeah. Completely moving away from this topic. What would you say are the biggest challenges you face? This could be as a student, this could be pursuing the career. What are the biggest challenges you face in your career?
I think so far it's been writing a grant. So I wrote a grant for for the National Institutes of Health to apply for funding for my PhD. And I did that grant back in 2019, and it was like a 4-month process of really just writing this grant. It ended up being, I think, all said and done, it was like 80 pages of writing that I had to submit for this grant. And I got reviews back, and they did not discuss my grant at all, which means that it was in like the bottom 50% of the applications. So putting so much work into that and having it be rejected was really difficult. But on the flip side, I resubmitted that grant, like did some rewriting of it and submitted it last August. And I was recently notified that we think it's going to be funded. So it goes to show, like, it was a place where I had to kind of not let myself be so like overwhelmed with the disappointment of not getting the grant, and then put my head down and keep writing and keep trying to get better. And eventually hopefully I should find out in the next few weeks if it was actually funded, but we think it's funded just based off of the score.
I mean, congratulations. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
I think like for kids who like the time commitment that you have to put in is multiple years, and the process is very long and tedious. So when kids want to pursue medicine, like it's kind of scary to think about stuff like that happening, like putting in this much work. Like my brother's going to be a doctor, and he had to take the MCAT, and I've never seen someone so sad in their entire life. Like, oh my gosh. And like seeing that, I keep thinking like, do I really want to pursue something like this? Like, is that something I want to do? But I think if you, like you're saying, if you're persistent, then it's not really an issue. You'll eventually get there.
Yeah, I think it's something where in both high school and college, they really don't teach you how to fail well. Because in adulthood, I mean, we fail a lot more. I fail a lot more than I ever thought I would fail. Because in going in high school, I remember thinking, okay, I have to have perfect grades to get into the right college. And same in college, I thought I need to have my 4.0 GPA so I can get to grad school. But in reality, as soon as I got to grad school, like there were so many instances of just your science failing, like my grant failing, and it's really easy to let that stuff overwhelm you. But if you can overcome that and keep being persistent, then that allows you to develop that resiliency, because there will be so many times in life where you fail and you just have to pick yourself back up again and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. To finish this off really quick, what advice would you give to students pursuing your career specifically, like in genetics or like in medicine or science in general?
I would definitely recommend that they find a hobby besides science. I think that was one of the recommendations someone gave me. And because as I mentioned lots, the moments where you have that failure, you need something else to fall back on. And normally the mantra in science now is to just keep pushing and kind of overwork yourself. And that can be really, really dangerous for a lot of people. So I definitely recommend finding something you enjoy and kind of knowing when your brain needs a break. And not that you're not working, but you're being smart about how you work and trying to take care of your mental health in it too.